Sarah Mitchell had always believed the world should bend to her will. At 42, she had perfected the art of getting her way through loud complaints and demands to speak with managers. Her friends jokingly called her Karen, though she never understood why they found it so funny. On this particular Tuesday morning in London, Sarah was running late for her spa appointment near Buckingham Palace. She had flown in from New York specifically for this luxury treatment, and nothing would ruin her perfectly planned day. The traffic was terrible, and her taxi driver seemed to be taking the longest possible route. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at the driver. "I could have walked faster than this. Don't you people know how to drive properly?" The driver, a patient man named Ahmed, simply nodded and continued navigating through the busy London streets. He had dealt with difficult passengers before, but something about this woman's tone made him uncomfortable. As they approached the palace area, Sarah noticed crowds of tourists gathering along the sidewalks. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Great, more tourists blocking everything. Can't you just drive through them or something?" Ahmed explained that they were approaching the changing of the guard ceremony area, and traffic always slowed down during these times. The roads near the palace had special restrictions, and pedestrians had the right of way in certain areas. "I don't care about some silly ceremony," Sarah huffed. "I have an appointment that costs more than most people make in a week. These tourists can wait." The taxi came to a complete stop as a group of mounted guards approached. Sarah watched through the window as the magnificent horses and their riders moved with perfect precision. The crowd fell silent in respect, but Sarah only saw obstacles preventing her from reaching her destination. "How long is this going to take?" she demanded. "I'm not paying extra for sitting in traffic because of some outdated tradition." Ahmed tried to explain that the ceremony was an important part of British culture and tourism, but Sarah wasn't listening. She was already calculating how late she would be and planning her complaint to the spa management. The horses were getting closer now, their hooves creating a rhythmic sound on the pavement. Each guard sat perfectly straight, their red uniforms bright against the gray London sky. The lead horse was particularly impressive, a large black stallion with intelligent eyes and a proud bearing. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Sarah muttered, pulling out her phone to record what she planned to use as evidence of poor service. "In America, we would never let some horse parade block paying customers from getting where they need to go." Ahmed glanced in his rearview mirror, noticing Sarah's agitated gestures. He had seen entitled tourists before, but her complete disregard for local customs concerned him. He decided to take a different route once the guards passed, hoping to avoid any confrontation. As the ceremony continued, Sarah's patience completely disappeared. She began tapping her foot aggressively and checking her expensive watch every few seconds. The spa had a strict cancellation policy, and she had no intention of losing her deposit because of what she considered a ridiculous spectacle. "That's it," she declared suddenly. "I'm getting out and walking. This is taking forever, and I refuse to be held hostage by some medieval nonsense." Ahmed tried to discourage her, explaining that walking through the ceremony area might not be allowed, but Sarah was already reaching for the door handle. Her mind was made up, and nothing would stop her from getting to that spa appointment on time. The taxi door slammed shut behind her as Sarah stepped onto the busy London street, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. She clutched her expensive handbag tightly and began pushing through the crowd of respectful onlookers. "Excuse me, coming through," she announced loudly, not caring that people were trying to enjoy the ceremony. "Some of us have important places to be." Several tourists tried to politely point out that she was disrupting the event, but Sarah ignored them completely. In her mind, her appointment was far more important than any tourist attraction. She had paid good money for her London trip, and she intended to get every minute's worth. The mounted guards were now very close, and the crowd had formed neat lines along the designated viewing areas. Sarah, however, had other plans. She spotted what looked like a shortcut through the ceremony route and decided to take it. Despite the clear barriers and signs indicating the area was off-limits to pedestrians. "This will only take a minute," she muttered to herself, ducking under a rope barrier. "I'll just cut through quickly and nobody will even notice." What Sarah didn't realize was that she was about to have an encounter that would change her perspective forever. The royal guards and their horses were not just for show. They were highly trained professionals with centuries of tradition behind them. And she was about to meet one particular horse who would teach her a lesson in respect she would never forget. As she stepped into the restricted area, several people in the crowd began pointing and whispering. The guards continued their formation, but the lead horse, that magnificent black stallion, had noticed the disruption. His ears perked up, and his intelligent eyes focused on the woman in the expensive clothes who clearly didn't belong where she was walking. Sarah was completely oblivious to the attention she was attracting. She was focused solely on her destination, determined to prove that her needs were more important than anyone else's traditions or rules. Sarah continued her unauthorized march through the ceremony area, completely ignoring the shocked stares from the crowd. She pulled out her phone and began recording herself, planning to document what she intended to describe as terrible crowd control for her social media followers. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she spoke into her phone camera while walking. "I'm trying to get to an important appointment, and these people expect me to stand around waiting for horses to walk by. In New York, we know how to manage events properly." The tourists around her began murmuring in different languages, but the universal tone of disapproval was clear. A few brave souls tried to get her attention, pointing toward the proper viewing areas, but Sarah waved them off dismissively. "I don't need anyone telling me where I can and cannot walk," she declared loudly. "This is a public street, and I have every right to use it." Meanwhile, the royal guards continued their formation with professional discipline. However, the lead guard, Sergeant Thomas Williams, had noticed the disruption. He had been part of the Queen's Guard for 15 years and had seen every type of tourist behavior imaginable. But this woman's blatant disregard for protocol was particularly concerning. The black stallion beneath him, named Thunder, was a veteran of countless ceremonies. The horse had an almost supernatural ability to sense trouble, and his ears were now fully alert. Thunder had been trained to respond to various situations, and his instincts told him that the loud woman ahead was going to cause problems. Sarah was now directly in the path of the approaching guards, but she seemed completely unaware of the brewing situation. She was too busy complaining into her phone camera about the inefficient British system and how she would never visit London again if this was how they treated paying tourists. "Look at this chaos," she continued her recording. "Nobody is in charge here. In America, we would have police directing people properly, not letting random tourists block everything." A young British couple standing nearby finally worked up the courage to approach her. "Excuse me, miss," the woman said politely, "but you really shouldn't be walking there. The guards need that space for the ceremony." Sarah spun around with fury in her eyes. "And who exactly are you to tell me where I can walk? Are you the Queen? Are you in charge of this circus?" The couple stepped back, intimidated by her aggressive response. The man tried to explain that they were just trying to help her avoid getting in trouble with security, but Sarah cut him off. "I don't need help from anyone. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know my rights as a tourist. I paid good money to be in this country, and I'll walk wherever I please." By now, several security personnel had noticed the situation. They began moving through the crowd, trying to reach Sarah before she could disrupt the ceremony further. However, the crowd was thick, and they were having difficulty getting through without causing their own disruption. Sarah continued her march, now only about 50 feet from the approaching guards. Thunder's nostrils flared slightly as he picked up her scent and assessed her body language. The horse had been trained to identify potential threats, and while Sarah wasn't dangerous in a physical sense, her chaotic energy was definitely concerning. Sergeant Williams made a subtle signal to his fellow guards, alerting them to keep formation while being prepared for whatever might happen next. The ceremony must continue regardless of disruptions, but they also had to be ready to respond if the situation escalated. "This is taking forever," Sarah complained to her phone. "I'm going to show everyone how ridiculous this whole thing is. Watch this." She suddenly veered directly into the center of the ceremony route, right where the guards would be passing in moments. The crowd gasped collectively, and several people shouted warnings, but Sarah either didn't hear them or chose to ignore them completely. "Perfect," she said to her camera. "Now I'll have a clear path, and maybe these horse people will learn to organize better next time." Thunder was now close enough to see Sarah clearly. The stallion's training kicked in, and he began to assess the situation like the professional he was. His rider felt the subtle change in the horse's posture and prepared for whatever action might be necessary. Sarah finally looked up from her phone and saw the massive black horse approaching. For the first time since leaving the taxi, she hesitated. The stallion was magnificent and intimidating, much larger than she had realized from a distance. "Well," she said, trying to maintain her confidence, "I guess you'll just have to go around me. I was here first." The crowd held its breath as the two forces, entitled tourist and trained royal guard horse, faced each other in the middle of the London street. Sarah clutched her designer handbag tighter and raised her chin defiantly, determined not to be intimidated by what she saw as just another obstacle in her day. Thunder's intelligent eyes fixed on her, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The horse had faced down much more serious threats than one rude tourist, but something about this encounter felt different. Perhaps it was her complete lack of respect, or maybe it was simply time for someone to teach her a lesson about proper behavior. Sergeant Williams felt his mount's muscles tense slightly and prepared himself for whatever Thunder had decided to do. After years of partnership, he trusted the horse's judgment completely, knowing that Thunder would handle the situation with the perfect balance of authority and restraint that the situation required. Sarah stood her ground, completely unaware that she was about to receive the most memorable lesson of her entire life. The tension in the air was thick as Sarah and Thunder faced each other in the middle of the ceremony route. The crowd had gone completely silent, hundreds of people holding their breath as they watched the standoff unfold. Even the other tourists who had been chattering excitedly about the ceremony were now frozen in anticipation. Sarah, still recording with her phone, decided to escalate the situation further. She stepped closer to Thunder, waving her free hand dismissively at the massive stallion. "Move along, horsey," she said in a mocking baby-talk voice. "Some of us have real business to attend to. You can play dress-up some other time." Thunder's ears flattened slightly against his head, a warning sign that Sergeant Williams recognized immediately. The horse was not aggressive by nature, but he had been trained to command respect, and this woman's behavior was beyond disrespectful. "Shoo, go on." Sarah made exaggerated shooing motions with her hand, treating the ceremonial guard horse like a stray dog. "I don't have time for this nonsense. Find somewhere else to parade around." The crowd gasped audibly at her behavior. Several people began pulling out their own phones to record what was clearly going to be an unforgettable encounter. A few tourists tried once more to warn Sarah that she was making a serious mistake, but she was too caught up in her own perceived importance to listen. Thunder took one measured step forward, his massive hooves making a solid thud on the pavement. The stallion was nearly 17 hands tall and weighed over 200 pounds of pure muscle and training. When he moved with purpose, it was an impressive sight that demanded respect. Sarah, however, seemed oblivious to the warning. "Oh, you think you're scary?" She laughed into her phone camera. "Wait until my followers see this. A horse trying to intimidate a paying tourist. This is going viral for sure." She took another step closer to Thunder, now within arm's reach of the powerful animal. "What are you going to do, horse? Bite me?" "I'll sue this whole country if you so much as touch me." Sergeant Williams remained perfectly still in his saddle, trusting Thunder to handle the situation appropriately. The horse had never injured anyone in his years of service, but he had certainly educated many people about proper respect and boundaries. Thunder lowered his magnificent head slightly, bringing his face closer to Sarah's level. His dark eyes seemed to look directly into her soul, and for just a moment Sarah felt a flicker of uncertainty. But her arrogance quickly pushed that feeling aside. "Nice try with the intimidation," she said, reaching out her hand toward Thunder's nose. "But I'm not scared of some overgrown pony in a costume parade." That was the moment Thunder decided he had heard enough. The stallion had been trained for crowd control, and he knew exactly how to deal with disruptive individuals without causing harm. In one swift, graceful movement that showcased years of training, Thunder opened his mouth and gently but firmly clamped his teeth around Sarah's expensive designer handbag. "Hey!" Sarah shrieked, suddenly finding herself in a tug-of-war with a royal guard horse. "Let go of my bag. That's a genuine Louis Vuitton. It cost more than you make in a month." Thunder held firm, not hard enough to damage the bag or hurt Sarah, but with enough pressure to make his point clear. The horse began to slowly back up, forcing Sarah to either let go of her precious handbag or follow along with Thunder's lead. "This is assault," Sarah screamed, still clinging to her bag. "I'm being assaulted by a horse. Someone call the police. Call the embassy. This is an international incident." The crowd's initial shock had given way to amazement and, in many cases, barely contained laughter. Tourists began taking photos and videos as Sarah found herself being led around by a horse that was clearly more civilized than she was. Thunder continued his slow, deliberate walk, taking Sarah further away from the ceremony route and toward the designated viewing area where she should have been all along. His movements were so controlled and purposeful that it was clear this was not random horse behavior. This was a professional doing his job. "Let go of my bag right now," Sarah demanded, her voice getting higher with each word. "I have rights. I'm an American citizen. You can't treat me like this." Sergeant Williams finally spoke, his voice calm and authoritative. "Madam, if you would simply move to the proper viewing area, I'm sure Thunder would be happy to return your belongings." "Thunder?" Sarah looked up at the guard in disbelief. "You named this beast Thunder? How original. And I'm not moving anywhere until he gives me back my bag." Thunder seemed to understand the conversation perfectly. He gave the handbag a gentle shake, not enough to damage it, but enough to remind Sarah, who was currently in control of the situation. The message was clear. Cooperation would result in the return of her property. The other guards in the formation had continued their ceremony around the disruption, maintaining their professional composure while their colleague and his horse dealt with the unruly tourist. The crowd was now openly enjoying the spectacle, many of them commenting that this was the most entertaining ceremony they had ever witnessed. Sarah's perfectly styled hair was beginning to come undone from her struggles with Thunder, and her expensive makeup was starting to smudge from the stress and exertion. For the first time in the encounter, she was beginning to realize that she might not be in complete control of the situation. Thunder continued his methodical escort of Sarah toward the proper viewing area, her designer handbag still firmly held in his teeth. With each step, Sarah's protest grew louder and more desperate, but the crowd's sympathy for her was rapidly disappearing. "This is kidnapping," she screamed, stumbling slightly in her high heels as Thunder led her along. "Horse-napping? Whatever you call it when a horse steals your property and forces you to follow it around." An elderly British gentleman in the crowd called out cheerfully, "I believe the proper term is being schooled, love." The comment drew laughter from the surrounding tourists, which only infuriated Sarah further. She was not accustomed to being the object of ridicule, especially not in front of what felt like hundreds of witnesses recording her humiliation. "Laugh all you want," she shouted at the crowd while still being towed by Thunder. "When my lawyer hears about this, every single one of you will wish you had minded your own business." Thunder, meanwhile, was handling the situation with remarkable patience and precision. His training had prepared him for various crowd control scenarios, but this particular method of dealing with disruptive individuals was proving both effective and entertaining for the onlookers. Sergeant Williams maintained his perfect posture in the saddle, occasionally offering gentle guidance to Thunder, though the horse clearly had the situation well in hand. The partnership between guard and horse was evident in their seamless cooperation. "Madam," Sergeant Williams said calmly, "Thunder is simply escorting you to where you should have been standing from the beginning. If you would cooperate instead of fighting, this would be much easier for everyone involved." "Cooperate?" Sarah's voice cracked with indignation. "I don't cooperate with livestock. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this circus immediately." A security officer had finally managed to make his way through the crowd and was now walking alongside the unusual procession. Officer Davies had been working palace security for 12 years and had seen many disruptions, but nothing quite like this. "Ma'am, if you could please calm down and work with Thunder here, we can resolve this quickly," Officer Davies said in a reasonable tone. "Work with Thunder?" Sarah repeated incredulously. "I'm not working with anyone, especially not some horse with delusions of grandeur. I want this animal arrested for theft." The absurdity of demanding a horse's arrest was not lost on the crowd, and more laughter rippled through the gathering. Someone in the crowd shouted, "The horse has better manners than you do." Sarah's face turned an alarming shade of red, partially from embarrassment and partially from the physical effort of being dragged along by Thunder, while trying to maintain her dignity in expensive heels. "Fine," she finally declared, stopping her resistance. "You win. I'll go to your stupid viewing area. Now give me back my bag." Thunder, however, was not quite satisfied with this grudging compliance. The horse had an intuitive understanding of sincerity, and Sarah's capitulation felt more like strategic retreat than genuine cooperation. He continued walking at his steady pace, handbag still securely in his possession. "I said I'll cooperate," Sarah insisted. "What more do you want from me?" Sergeant Williams leaned down slightly from his saddle. "I think Thunder is waiting for a proper request, madam." Perhaps if you asked politely instead of demanding. The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. She, Sarah Mitchell, who had never had to ask politely for anything in her adult life, was being forced to negotiate with a horse. The humiliation was almost unbearable. "You want me to say please to a horse?" she asked in disbelief. "Thunder has been nothing but professional throughout this encounter," Sergeant Williams replied. "A little courtesy would go a long way." The crowd had gathered closer now, forming a loose circle around the ongoing drama. Children were pointing and giggling, parents were taking photos, and several tourists were providing live commentary to friends and family back home via video calls. Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her, many of them clearly enjoying her predicament. She realized that her choices were limited: continue this public humiliation indefinitely or swallow her pride and make a polite request to a horse. "This is insane," she muttered under her breath. Then, slightly louder, she said, "Thunder, could you please—" "Give me back my handbag?" Thunder's ears perked up at the change in her tone, but he didn't immediately release the bag. It was as if he was testing whether she truly meant it or was just going through the motions. "Please," Sarah repeated with slightly more sincerity this time. "I would like my handbag back, please." Thunder considered this for a moment, then gently opened his mouth and allowed the handbag to drop to the ground at Sarah's feet. The crowd erupted in applause as if they had just witnessed a successful diplomatic negotiation. Sarah quickly snatched up her bag and began checking it for damage, muttering complaints about horse saliva and ruined leather. However, upon inspection she found that Thunder had been remarkably careful. There wasn't so much as a scratch on the expensive accessory. "There now," Officer Davies said with satisfaction. "That wasn't so difficult, was it? Now if you could please make your way to the designated viewing area like everyone else, we can all enjoy the rest of the ceremony." But Thunder wasn't quite finished with Sarah's education. As she turned to leave, clutching her recovered handbag, the magnificent stallion took one more step and gently nudged her shoulder with his nose. Not hard enough to knock her over, but firmly enough to get her attention one final time. Thunder's gentle but firm nudge caught Sarah completely off guard. She stumbled slightly, more from surprise than from the actual force of the contact, and found herself face to face with the stallion's intelligent dark eyes once again. "What now?" she demanded, though her voice had lost much of its earlier venom. "I said please. I got my bag back. What else could you possibly want?" Thunder didn't move away. Instead, he maintained eye contact with Sarah in a way that felt almost human-like in its intensity. The horse seemed to be communicating something important, though Sarah couldn't quite understand what it was. Sergeant Williams, who had developed an almost supernatural ability to interpret Thunder's behavior over their years of partnership, recognized what was happening. "I believe Thunder wants you to understand something important, madam." "Understand what?" Sarah asked, exasperated. "That horses can be bullies too?" "Message received." "No," the sergeant said quietly. "I think he wants you to understand respect." The word hit Sarah like a cold splash of water. Respect. When was the last time someone had used that word in connection with her behavior? When was the last time she had shown genuine respect to anyone, rather than just demanding it for herself? Thunder took a small step closer, and this time Sarah didn't back away. Something in the horse's demeanor had changed. The authority was still there, but now there was something else. Something that almost looked like patience, or perhaps understanding. "Thunder has served in the Royal Guard for 8 years, Sergeant Williams continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "He's protected the royal family, maintained order during dozens of ceremonies, and has never once lost his temper or acted inappropriately. He understands duty, honor, and service in ways that many humans never learn." Sarah found herself listening despite her usual inclination to interrupt. There was something in the guard's voice that suggested this wasn't just a lecture, it was an explanation. "When you disrupted the ceremony today," the sergeant went on, "you weren't just inconveniencing tourists or blocking traffic. You were disrespecting something that Thunder takes very seriously. This ceremony represents centuries of tradition, honor, and service to something greater than oneself." Thunder nodded his great head slightly, as if agreeing with his rider's words. The gesture was so perfectly timed that Sarah couldn't help but wonder if the horse actually understood the conversation. "But," Sergeant Williams added, "Thunder also recognized that you needed guidance, not punishment. Everything he did was designed to teach, not to harm. He could have easily intimidated you or caused you to fall, but instead he chose to educate you about boundaries and respect. Sarah looked at Thunder with new eyes. The horse that she had dismissed as an overgrown pony was actually a highly trained professional who had handled her disruption with remarkable skill and restraint. He had managed to stop her inappropriate behavior, relocate her to the proper area, and even return her property, all while maintaining perfect control and causing no actual harm. Sarah began, then stopped. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was genuinely speechless. The crowd around them had quieted, sensing that something important was happening. Even the children had stopped their chatter, instinctively understanding that this was a moment that deserved attention. Thunder extended his neck slightly, bringing his head closer to Sarah's level. His dark eyes seemed to look directly into hers, and for a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine humility. "I think," she said slowly. "I think I understand." Thunder's ears perked up at the change in her tone. This wasn't the sarcastic, defeated compliance from earlier. This sounded like actual comprehension. I was wrong," Sarah continued, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "I disrupted your ceremony. I was rude to everyone here. I acted like my appointment was more important than all of this." She gestured vaguely at the guards, the ceremony, the crowd of respectful tourists. "I'm sorry," she said, looking directly at Thunder. "I'm sorry I called you names and treated you badly. You were just doing your job and I made it harder." Thunder seemed to consider her apology for a moment. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to several people's eyes, the magnificent stallion gently lowered his head in what could only be described as a bow of acknowledgement. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, not mocking this time, but genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. Even Officer Davies found himself clapping, impressed by both Thunder's patient teaching and Sarah's willingness to learn. Sarah reached out tentatively, and when Thunder didn't pull away, she gently stroked his neck. "You're a good teacher," she whispered. "Much better than I was a student." Sergeant Williams smiled down at her. "Thunder has that effect on people. He has a way of bringing out the best in everyone he meets. Even when they don't know they have a best to bring out." For the first time since arriving in London, Sarah felt something other than anger or frustration. She felt humbled, and strangely, it wasn't an entirely unpleasant feeling. "What happens now?" she asked, still stroking Thunder's neck. "Now," said Sergeant Williams, "you watch the ceremony from the proper viewing area like everyone else, and Thunder and I finish our duty." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. The lesson was over, but the learning had just begun. Sarah made her way to the designated viewing area, her steps slower and more thoughtful than when she had first stormed away from the taxi. The crowd parted respectfully to let her through, and several people offered her small smiles of encouragement. The atmosphere had completely changed from mockery to something approaching admiration for her willingness to learn. She found a spot along the barrier where she could watch the remainder of the ceremony. Her designer handbag clutched less tightly in her hands. For the first time, she actually looked at what was happening around her, instead of just seeing obstacles to her personal agenda. The precision of the guards was remarkable. Each movement was deliberate and practiced, the result of months or years of training. The horses moved as if they were dancing, their steps perfectly synchronized with their riders and with each other. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the skill and dedication on display. "Quite something, isn't it?" said a voice beside her. Sarah turned to see an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm Margaret. I come to watch the ceremony every few months when I visit my grandson in London." "Sarah," she replied, surprised by her own willingness to engage in friendly conversation with a stranger. Normally, she would have ignored such an approach or given a curt response designed to discourage further interaction. "I saw what happened with Thunder," Margaret continued. "That horse has a gift for teaching people about respect. My grandson told me about him. Apparently he's quite famous among the guards for his ability to handle difficult situations." Sarah watched as Thunder and Sergeant Williams moved through their formation with flawless precision. "I can see why," she said quietly. I was horrible to him. To everyone, really." Margaret patted Sarah's arm gently. "The important thing is that you recognized it and apologized." Not everyone is capable of that kind of growth. As the ceremony continued, Sarah found herself thinking about Thunder's lesson in a broader context. When was the last time she had truly apologized for anything? When was the last time she had considered that other people's needs, traditions, or feelings might be just as important as her own? Her phone buzzed with a notification, and she glanced down to see that her spa appointment was in 30 minutes. The old Sarah would have immediately started calculating whether she could still make it, would have begun planning her complaint about the delay. But something had shifted inside her. "Margaret," she said suddenly, "do you know if there are any charities that support the Royal Guard or their horses?" Margaret looked surprised but pleased by the question. "Why, yes, I believe there are several organizations that help care for retired guard horses and support the families of guardsmen." "Are you thinking of making a donation?" Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone again, but this time for a different purpose. "Thunder taught me something important today. I think it's only right that I give something back." She quickly searched for Royal Guard charities and found several reputable organizations. Without hesitation, she made a substantial donation to a fund that cared for retired ceremonial horses. It was more money than she had planned to spend on her entire London trip, but it felt right. "That's wonderful," Margaret said warmly. "I'm sure Thunder would be pleased to know that his lesson had such a positive impact." The ceremony was drawing to a close, and Sarah watched as Thunder and Sergeant Williams prepared to march past the viewing area one final time. As they approached her section of the crowd, she did something that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. She began to applaud, not the polite, obligatory clapping she might have done to blend in with a crowd, but genuine, enthusiastic applause for Thunder's professionalism and Sergeant Williams's patience. Other tourists joined in, creating a wave of appreciation that followed the guards as they completed their route. When Thunder passed directly in front of her, the magnificent stallion turned his head slightly in her direction. For just a moment their eyes met again, and Sarah could have sworn she saw approval in the horse's gaze. She mouthed "thank you" silently, and Thunder's ears twitched forward in what might have been acknowledgement. After the guards had passed, Sarah remained in the viewing area, watching as the tourists began to disperse. She pulled out her phone and canceled her spa appointment, explaining that she had experienced something more valuable than any beauty treatment could provide. "Are you staying to watch anything else?" Margaret asked. Sarah looked around at the bustling scene, tourists sharing photos, children asking their parents questions about the horses, vendors selling souvenirs to commemorate the experience. Instead of seeing chaos and inefficiency, she now saw a community of people sharing in something special. "I think I might," she said. "I don't think I've ever really watched anything before. I mean, really watched and appreciated it for what it is." Margaret smiled. "Thunder would be proud. That horse has a way of opening people's eyes to what really matters." As Sarah stood there, she realized that her entire London trip would now be remembered, not for luxury spa treatments or exclusive shopping, but for a life lesson delivered by a Royal Guard horse named Thunder. It was not the vacation she had planned, but it was exactly the experience she had needed. She thought about the stories she would tell when she returned home, and for the first time, they wouldn't be complaints about poor service or incompetent staff. Instead, she would tell people about a horse who taught her about respect, dignity, and the importance of understanding that the world didn't revolve around her personal schedule. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the palace grounds, and Sarah knew that this day would mark a turning point in how she approached life. Thunder had given her a gift that no amount of money could buy, the gift of perspective. 6 months later, Sarah found herself standing in the same spot near Buckingham Palace. But everything about her presence there was different. Gone were the designer clothes chosen to impress, replaced by comfortable walking shoes and a practical jacket. Her hair was pulled back simply, and her expression was one of anticipation rather than entitlement. She wasn't alone this time. Beside her stood her teenage niece Emma, who was visiting London for the first time. Sarah had insisted on bringing Emma to see the changing of the guard ceremony, though she hadn't yet explained the full significance of the location. "Aunt Sarah, are you sure this is worth missing the shopping district?" Emma asked, checking her phone impatiently. "I mean, it's just horses walking around in circles, right?" Sarah smiled, recognizing her former attitude in her niece's words. "Trust me, Emma. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers." As the ceremony began, Sarah pointed out details she had never noticed during her first visit. The precision of the formations, the history behind the uniforms, the dedication required to maintain such traditions. Emma gradually became more interested, asking questions instead of checking her phone. "The horses are beautiful," Emma admitted as the guards approached. "Do they all have names?" "The lead horse is named Thunder," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of special fondness. He's special." As if summoned by her words, Thunder and Sergeant Williams appeared at the head of the formation. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the magnificent stallion who had changed her life. The horse looked exactly the same, proud, alert, and radiating quiet authority. "He's gorgeous," Emma breathed. "Look at how he carries himself. Like he knows he's important." "He does know," Sarah said quietly. "And he is important. Thunder taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life." Emma looked at her aunt curiously. "A horse taught you a lesson? What kind of lesson?" Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to share a story she had told many times over the past 6 months, but never to someone so close to her own family. About respect. About understanding that my problems aren't more important than other people's traditions, jobs, or feelings. As Thunder passed their viewing spot, Sarah did something that would have seemed impossible during her first visit. She stepped forward slightly and called out softly, "Thank you, Thunder." The stallion's ears pricked forward and he turned his head toward the sound of her voice. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Thunder's intelligent eyes met Sarah's across the crowd. The horse seemed to study her face, and then, incredibly, he nodded his head once in what appeared to be recognition. Sergeant Williams, noticing his mount's attention, looked over at Sarah as well. Their eyes met briefly, and the guard smiled and touched the brim of his hat in a small salute of acknowledgement. The gesture was so subtle that most of the crowd missed it, but Sarah felt it like a warm embrace. "Did that horse just recognize you?" Emma asked in amazement. "And did the guard just salute you?" "Aunt Sarah, what exactly happened here?" As the ceremony continued, Sarah told Emma the whole story. She didn't minimize her own bad behavior, or try to make herself look better than she had been. She explained how entitled and rude she had been, how Thunder had quite literally taken her in hand, and how that experience had forced her to examine her entire approach to life. "You were really that awful?" Emma asked, though her tone was more curious than judgmental. "Worse," Sarah admitted. "I was the kind of person who thought the world should stop for my convenience. I never considered that other people had jobs to do, traditions to maintain, or feelings that mattered as much as mine." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "What changed after that day?" Sarah smiled as she watched Thunder complete his formation with perfect precision. "Everything changed. I started saying please and thank you more often. I stopped demanding to speak to managers every time something didn't go exactly my way. I began to actually listen when people tried to help me instead of just waiting for my turn to complain." "That sounds like a pretty big change." "It was," Sarah agreed. "And it started with a horse who refused to let me disrespect him or anyone else. Thunder didn't get angry or try to hurt me. He just firmly, patiently taught me about boundaries and respect." The ceremony was concluding, and Sarah pulled out an envelope from her jacket pocket. "I have something I want to give to Sergeant Williams," she told Emma. "Wait here for a minute." Sarah made her way through the crowd as the guards prepared to depart. She approached Sergeant Williams respectfully, waiting for an appropriate moment to get his attention. "Sergeant Williams," she called softly. "Excuse me?" The guard turned toward her and recognition dawned in his eyes. "Well, if it isn't Thunder's most famous student," he said with a warm smile. "How are you, madam?" "Much better, thanks to Thunder," Sarah replied. "I wanted to give you this." She handed him the envelope. "It's a letter for the Royal Guard Administration. I've started a scholarship fund for children of guardsmen who want to attend university. I thought Thunder might like to know that his lesson is still teaching people even now." Sergeant Williams looked genuinely moved. "That's extraordinary. Thunder will be very pleased to hear about this." He paused, then added, "You know, he often looks toward the crowd during ceremonies, as if he's looking for someone. I think he remembers you." "I hope so," Sarah said. "I certainly remember him." As Sarah rejoined Emma, her niece looked at her with new respect. "You really did change, didn't you?" "I'm still changing," Sarah corrected. "Every day I try to remember Thunder's lesson about treating others with respect and understanding that I'm not the center of the universe." They walked away from the ceremony together. But Sarah paused to look back one more time. Thunder was still visible in the distance, and she could have sworn he was looking in her direction. "Thank you, Thunder," she whispered again, knowing that the magnificent horse had given her far more than a lesson in manners. He had given her a chance to become a better person, and she was determined never to waste that gift. As they headed toward their next destination, a visit to the horse sanctuary that Sarah now supported monthly, Emma asked, "Do you think I'll ever meet a teacher like Thunder?" Sarah smiled. "I hope you'll never need one the way I did, but if you do, I hope you'll be smart enough to listen the first time." The lesson of Thunder lived on, not just in Sarah's transformed life, but in every person she now treated with respect, every act of kindness she performed, and every moment she chose understanding over entitlement. One horse had taught her that true strength comes not from demanding respect, but from earning it through how we treat others.